The skies above Concordia had always been a paradox of beauty and dread. For 10 millennia, the planet's atmosphere glowed with a liturgy of light. Sunbeams would break upon cathedral spires like sacramental knives, scattering 1,000 shards of radiance across immaculate plazas. Streets were measured by catechism, distances by decree. Marble carried the weight of a civilization, convinced that symmetry could restrain sin. Every tower was a sermon, every bridge a covenant, every law a blade. Beneath the twin suns, the capital of High Justiciar rose from the basalt root of the world like a chalice. Its terraces spiraled upward in tiers of civic rites, vaults of codices, archives of precedent, cloisters of jurists, armories of zeal. From the uppermost colonnades, the scales of the Imperium were visible in mosaic, one pan bearing the Aquila, the other a golden star. The star represented Concordia's boast and burden alike, the belief that order could be made perfect, and once perfect, made eternal. Perfection is a declaration of war against the universe. The first sign of collapse came as a silence that did not belong to nature. Vox nets thinned to whispers, as if the air refused to carry voices. Liturgical broadcasts stuttered into snow. The astro choir collapsed in a single convulsion, a circle of veiled figures, toppling like dominoes as light bled from their eyes. Tech priests reported harmonics in the noosphere untranslatable by binaric litanies, equations that finished themselves. Administratum officials filed emergency addenda to the Codex of Public Order, drafting laws to forbid unnamed phenomena which no mind could fully remember upon reading. Above the outer moons, a flower of unreality opened and closed like a slow-breathing wound. It did not bleed, it drank. The night-side aurora sharpened to edges, each curtain of color resolving into glyphs that rearranged themselves with deliberate, judicial calm. Scholars traced the glyphs as if they were veins and named the rift an anomaly. Confessors called it a trial. Inquisitorial auguries recorded it as an inevitability arriving precisely on time. The storms began without thunder. Gravity misspoke, and stones contradicted their foundations. Statues turned their faces toward the wrong north. Carpets rippled like water without wind. On the first day, the oceans forgot their tides. On the second, the wind rehearsed a language of verdicts. On the third, the light itself inferred meanings from the shadows and reversed them. Marble joints parted in sighs. Bridges folded like prayer hands and would not unfold. When invasion came, it did not announce itself with a fleet. It came as a correction. The 9th Concordian Guard, pattern perfect, parade straight, took positions to secure the hall of adjudication. Their visors held the same horizon. Their hearts beat to the metronome of the same oath. Somewhere between the third and fourth breath, they diverged without moving. Half the regiment lowered their weapons because the law required preservation of citizens at any cost. The other half raised their weapons because the law required prevention of heresy at any cost. The law had not changed. The cost had. Blood is a simpler language than statute. Municipal augurs trailed accountancy of the dead like reams of red ribbon. Scribes revised regulations in real time, annotating the margin with footnotes that sprouted teeth. Proclamations multiplied the way mold multiplies in damp places, self-evident, inarguable, fatal. In the cathedrals, candles bent their flames to form numerals, which counted down from a number too large to comprehend. At 0, bells refused to ring. From the rift, mercy descended in the shape of an angel. It was not horned nor slavering. It was composed of pages. Leaves of scripture feathered its wings, their inks in motion, their letters debating each other in polite, murderous script. Its face bore both youth and ruin with equal poise, like two verdicts read at the same breath. Where it passed, men wept not from fear but from relief, as if a knot in the spine of the world had finally slipped. It carried no weapon. It carried an offer. They named it Equilibrion, the keeper of perfect balance. Equilibrion did not speak, because meaning is the first casualty of speech. It allowed the populace to feel the sensation of justice with such clarity that the distinction between mercy and punishment evaporated. Judges felt the weight of sentences as a sacrament upon their bones. Penitents felt the absolution inside the pain of the lash like sweetness after bitterness, indivisible. The Order of St. Halion formed lines against the apparition, shields layered edge to edge, halos of power humming like suppressed storms. The apparition halted and bowed to the geometry of their courage. Geometry bowed back. The first charge broke upon an idea rather than a body. Force dissipated into the concept of its opposite. Halberds struck air and discovered that air had become the definition of steel. Bolters roared, and the sound of their righteousness fed the enemy like fat to a flame. Sisters fell to their knees not from injury but from arithmetic. The balance between their creed and the void had been tallied and found correct, therefore unnecessary. The certainty that had sustained them hollowed in an instant, like a cathedral scooped clean from within. Orbital bastions interpreted the planet's heresy as a request. Fires fell in white lines that drew new boundaries across the maps. Hives sublimed to dust, not calcined but acquitted from matter. Hab blocks became colonnades of steam. The oceans rose in sheets and stacked themselves into glass that reflected no sky. Somewhere beneath all this, the crust groaned with the patience of a thing that has seen empires come and go and knows how to make more. In the underhive, the mirror of justice was born between breaths. Some had dreamed it, a relic, a lens, a blade, a verdict. Some had calculated it, a device to focus the truth of law into light. Some had feared it, a curse which would subtract the guilty from existence and subtract the innocent in the act of subtraction. It came to be as things do in the Imperium because enough hands bled upon the altar and enough names were spoken in sequence until the syllables could no longer bear the weight and collapsed into an object. The mirror did not reflect. It revealed. Citizens who dared its radius found themselves seen by every law they had ever obeyed or broken. The obedience burned hotter, the transgressions cooled to stone. Whole districts froze in tableau, where weeping and jubilation shared the same mouth. The Order of St. Halion requisitioned the device and carried it into the open with censure thuribles burning so hot that the brass sagged. Above their procession, the rift widened, petal by petal, like a calm mouth preparing to pronounce a final thesis. Concordia held for 12 hours at the level of the soul. That is longer than most worlds manage. During those hours, public squares staged verdicts with no defendants. The judges placed their hammers upon the dais and allowed their absence to weigh more than the instrument. Children stood in doorways and discovered that hiding was indistinguishable from standing guard if one's heart aligned its shadow correctly. Confessors bled pages. Tech priests blinked and saw the machine god's face in the negative space between digits. The astro choir lay with their mouths open like wells, and one could drop wishes into them and hear wishes echo back, returned, stamped and docketed. The order brought the mirror to the plaza of first principles. The plaza had been engraved with concentric axioms stating that the emperor's will was the axis upon which order turned. The letters now flowed like gutters carrying liquid gold toward a drain which had not existed the day before. The mirror took position at the center. Around it, the Halion formation resolved into nested polygons, each angle hooked to an oath. At the perimeter, the 9th Concordian Guard reassembled, numbers thinned, faces locked, souls split. Equilibrium descended and placed one bare foot upon the flagstones. No mark, no crack, only the tact of a judge who knows exactly how much to lean upon the bench so as to communicate compassion and control in the same posture. It extended a hand toward the mirror, as if to steady a mirror which had never wavered. The planet listed. Orbit complained. The moons rolled their eyes along new axes. Bastions found their firing solutions, drifting by degrees that should not have existed. In the upper vault of the sky, the twin suns wore halos of clauses, conditionals, and provisos, like legislators offered the crowns of saints. The mirror inhaled. It did so in a manner beyond lungs, drawing into itself not air but ambiguity. Notions shrank, exceptions faded. Mitigations fell silent with the soft shame of excuses recognized too late. What the mirror revealed was simple to the point of cruelty. Justice without remainder. The guilty were lightened until they weighed nothing. They floated upward like lanterns and passed through the rift as if accepted into another jurisdiction. The innocent were anchored with such tenderness that bones sang. They became pillars. Those who were both guilty and innocent, which is to say most, were divided into their components. The components regarded each other and understood at last why compromise feels like dying. The plaza acquired new statues that had not been carved by human hands. Pilasters of confession, plinths of defiance, every line exact. The Inquisition recorded a declaration of retroactive exterminatus, even as the engines spoke the order. It was a ceremonial punctuation mark added to a sentence the planet had already finished writing. Fire fell again, this time not to cleanse but to underline. The aqueducts briefed the flames on where to go. The roofs offered themselves as kindling with professional courtesy. The cathedrals collapsed inward, as if kneeling to the one verdict left standing. In the final minutes, Concordia's core remembered it was part of a star's long grief. It opened its throat and taught the crust a hymn of release. Cities rose from their foundations, not in panic but in poise, and drifted like reliquaries through the new air. Gravity, embarrassed, pretended it had never promised anything. Over the ruins, equilibrium inclined its head not in triumph nor pity, but with the grace of an arbiter who has returned all accounts to zero. Silence returned, this time correct. The rift folded itself along a seam that had been invisible until it closed. The aurora unstitched. In orbit, an inquisitorial fortress ship rotated to present its most neutral aspect to the absence where Concordia had been, and logged an addendum. System sealed by edict of denial. Conceptual contaminants anticipated. The log appended itself of its own accord, with a note in a hand no quill had written. The mirror remains. It remained not as metal nor relic, but as method. Vox ghosts escaped into the warp with the sound of pages turning. On agricultural worlds, far from the old trade routes, magistrates woke from nightmares with palms imprinted by balances. In hive habs 2 sectors away, tap water ran clear as glass for the first time in a century and tasted faintly of verdict. On a forge moon across the spiral arm, a junior engine seer discovered a harmonic hidden under the machine psalms subaudible, impeccable, devout. When amplified, it flattened disagreements in the manufactorum for 14 hours and cost 2 lives who could not bear to live uncontradicted. The Imperium reflexed as it always does, with banners, with penance, with war. But something else moved in the marrow. The word justice, once the cleanest blade in the lexicon, acquired a burr. Preachers discovered that when they pronounced it, the echo returned a question mark heavy as iron. Officers discovered that orders left fingerprints on their wrists. Mothers discovered that lullabies could be indictments if sung with enough love. The Astronomicon flickered. Navigators reported a shadow at the edge of the light, shaped like a book closed upon a verdict. On a void ship whose name refused to be spoken aloud, the Ordo Hereticus assembled a council to consider a thing larger than punishment: definition, data, saints, regurgitated telemetry in perfect columns. Parchments grew teeth again and were soothed with wax. In the viewing sanctum, the hololith replayed the plaza of first principles, the mirror exhaling certainty and inhaling doubt until doubt became a child with no home. Somewhere inside the fortress, a vault of forbidden exemplar unlocked itself because the story it held had decided it belonged to the moment. The Inquisitor presiding recorded a line: Second Reformation War declared. Objective: rescue the meaning from the word. Across the long dark, the 4 great powers in the sea behind the stars tasted the flavor of a new sacrament. It was not blood, nor terror, nor despair. It was balance, and balance is a feast if you are a god who feeds upon edges. The warp leaned closer to the thin membrane of real and murmured a promise that sounded like mercy to the ear and like arithmetic to the mind. Concordia's orbit cooled. The place where the planet had been became a scar as clean as a ruler's bite, the sort of straight line that makes maps lie. Pilgrims came and left nothing. The vox there carries only one frequency now, a music without instrument that trains the hand to weigh before it reaches. Navigators avoid it, not from fear, but from the temptation to agree. Somewhere a child is born, whose first gesture is the sign of the scales. Somewhere a saint's bones weep light that measures rather than warms. Somewhere a war begins, not for survival, but for the custody of a noun. In a galaxy that has forgotten how to end sentences without shouting, a silence like a full stop arrives and teaches everything how to read again. Concordia is gone. Its lesson remains. The engines of crusade wake, and in the vaulted hangars of the next age, armorers engrave onto ceramite a phrase not quite a prayer and not quite a threat: justice, accounted for. The count begins. The ruins of Concordia drifted through the void like a shattered hymn. Fragments of marble and bone traced elliptical paths around the scar where a world had once existed, their momentum whispering the last verses of a prayer too vast for human throats. The exterminatus order had been redundant. The planet had annihilated itself through logic so pure it became divine. Yet purity leaves echoes, and the void has perfect memory. Weeks after the planet's erasure, the first of those echoes reached the listening stations of the segmentum obscurus. Vox static shaped itself into chants of impossible clarity, voices overlapping in counterpoint, each syllable measured with judicial precision. The transmissions were not coming from the debris but through it, as though the vacuum itself had acquired the instinct to worship. Tech adepts transcribed the signal and discovered that each pulse corresponded to the heartbeat of a living man. They did not know whose heartbeat, only that it repeated across 1 million receivers with identical rhythm. Faith had found a new medium. Aboard the inquisitorial fortress times High Justiciar *, Inquisitor Cauldron convened a conclave. The chamber was carved from basalt and glass, its dome etched with the scales of the Imperium, one side gilded, the other blackened by flame. Beneath those scales hovered dozens of hololithic projectors, each replaying a spectral version of Concordia's last moments, armies dissolving into abstraction, the angel Equilibrion raising its hand, the mirror of justice drinking the sky. Every time the footage looped, something changed. Sometimes the mirror seemed to breathe, sometimes the angel smiled, sometimes the planet appeared whole again for the fraction of a second before vanishing into light. Each variation was mathematically precise, none could be explained. Cauldron's voice, when it finally broke the silence, was less a command than a confession. The Imperium, he said, had mistaken obedience for faith. What Concordia had revealed was that justice was not a weapon of survival, but a reflection of belief. When the reflection cracks, belief seeks a new surface. He ordered the formation of an expedition to find that surface, to follow the echo of Concordia's death, until it revealed what still lived within it. Thus began the pilgrimage of fragments. The fleet numbered 40 ships, frigates, transports, and relic barges, drawn from dozens of chapters and orders. Their banners bore the sigil of a broken scale surrounded by a circle of fire, the emblem of the new crusade. They did not call themselves crusaders, they called themselves auditors, for their task was to reconcile the accounts of the dead. The journey carried them into regions uncharted since the age of strife. The void there was thick, the warp current sluggish as clotting blood. Astropaths whispered of ghost planets visible only to faith, appearing in dreams as cities made of judgment, their gates guarded by concepts rather than walls. Every translation into the immaterium brought new portents, lights moving in reverse, prayers answered before they were spoken, and the faint laughter of children reciting laws that had never existed. When the fleet reached the coordinates, triangulated from the Concordian transmissions, they found no planet, only a sea of dust illuminated by the dim glow of a dying star. Yet their auspex screens filled with silhouettes, mountains, spires, oceans, a world composed of remembrance rather than matter. It shimmered like heat haze, resolving and dissolving with every heartbeat. The vox chants grew louder, until even the servitors began to mouth the words. Cauldron named the apparition times Ecliptis Concordia, times the Echo World. Landing craft descended through the spectral atmosphere, their hulls vibrating with harmonic resonance as if brushing against invisible scripture. The The ground below was firm and yet yielded like memory. Every step left footprints of light that slowly faded, replaced by faint reflections of the walkers themselves. The pilgrims disembarked in silence, their faith the only language that seemed to function. The first structure they encountered was a cathedral grown entirely from glass. Its walls refracted the crimson sun into columns of gold and shadow. Within it, statues stood not of saints or soldiers, but of abstractions: duty, mercy, balance, contradiction. Each figure bore its own chains, yet each chain was fastened to itself. At the center of the nave floated a fragment of the mirror, an obsidian shard pulsing with internal luminescence. When approached, it projected not light, but understanding. Every pilgrim saw their own faith reduced to essence, stripped of ritual and hypocrisy, laid bare as arithmetic. Some wept, some screamed, a few simply knelt and did not rise again. Reports from Ecliptis spread through the fleet like contagion. Officers who had never prayed began to speak in perfect liturgical symmetry. Engines refused to malfunction, as if machines themselves had joined the devotion. Servitors ceased their binary muttering and hummed lullabies remembered from childhoods they no longer possessed. Even the void shields shimmered with faint halos, their energy signatures harmonizing into chords of measured beauty. Cauldron ordered samples taken, but no data slate could record the phenomena. Every attempt at measurement collapsed into parable. The shard of the mirror, when lifted by mechanized tongs, emitted a low vibration that reorganized the surrounding dust into symmetrical patterns resembling city maps. The patterns shifted constantly, but one feature remained: a central plaza marked by a single word in High Gothic times, Equitas asterisk. Then came the first miracle. On the third night, the dying sun of Ecliptis flared without warning. The fleet's sensors recorded an impossible spike in energy, yet no radiation followed. Instead, vox channels filled with human voices, hundreds, then thousands, each reciting confessions. The voices belonged to the dead of Concordia. Entire regiments, saints and sinners alike, speaking as one. Their words formed no plea for salvation. They were accounting entries of the soul, lists of actions balanced against intentions. Every confession ended the same way: asterisk, let the scales decide, asterisk. From the shard rose a figure of light, neither angel nor daemon. It bore the outline of a man, but within its body swam galaxies of script. It identified itself not as equilibrion, but as its remainder, a resonance, not a presence. It claimed to be the echo of the planet's last thought, the realization that justice cannot be destroyed because it was never alive. The being did not ask for worship, it demanded witnesses. Then it fractured into 7 rays that dispersed across the stars. Each ray traveled in a different direction, carrying a portion of the mirror's essence. The fleet divided to pursue them. Each group vanished into the void, their destination unknown. Cauldron remained behind with the core fragment, determined to preserve its light. He soon discovered that the shard was growing, feeding on conviction. The more his followers believed in its sanctity, the brighter it burned. Faith had become fuel. The transformation began quietly. Hymns shifted tone. Prayers changed tense from supplication to declaration. The followers started calling the shard the heart of justice. Those who touched it felt their doubts dissolve, their memories align. They ceased to sleep, they ceased to question, they became radiant. But radiance, in the language of the warp, is another word for contagion. The warp surrounding Ecliptis stirred. Shadows gathered like ink drawn to light. The chant from the void deepened, harmonizing with voices not of humanity but of something older. Across the Imperium, the 4 great powers turned their gaze. Justice, once the Imperium's fortress, now glowed like a meal laid upon the table of gods. Khorne tasted the purity of vengeance and smiled. Tsiench admired the symmetry of belief evolving into paradox. Nurgle embraced the decay inherent in perfection. Slaanesh listened to the ecstasy of faith consuming itself and found it exquisite. On the 9th day, the sky of Ecliptis cracked. From the fissures descended avatars of chaos, not as monsters but as ideals gone feral. They wore the forms of judges, saints, and soldiers, their armor adorned with runes of impossible virtue. They proclaimed themselves the time's adjudicators of the true balance *, emissaries of the warp sent to correct the hypocrisy of mortal law. Their weapons were not forged of metal but of judgment. Every strike forced its victim to confront the sum of their own contradictions. Entire platoons froze, paralyzed by self-knowledge. Ships in orbit fired upon their own reflections. Cauldron led the defense, wielding the shard like a torch against the abyss. Its light burned through the illusions of chaos, revealing beneath their noble guises the swirling filth of entropy. Yet with each victory the shard dimmed, as if compassion were draining it. Justice could not kill without wounding itself. The battle became a sacrament of exhaustion. At the height of the conflict, a final vision engulfed the battlefield. The ground liquefied into mirrored surfaces, reflecting not bodies but choices. Every soldier saw the moment their faith had first fractured, replayed in merciless clarity. Some broke, some ascended, a few simply disappeared, leaving behind silhouettes of light etched into the air. When the radiance faded, the adjudicators were gone, so was Cauldron. Only the shard remained, pulsing weakly at the center of a crater shaped like a scale. The surviving fleet regrouped, their minds fractured, their beliefs rewritten. They no longer served an emperor of flesh, but an idea wearing his mask. The crusade had become religion, the pilgrimage a revelation. The echo of Concordia had found its new home in the hearts of those who mistook understanding for salvation. In the warp, the gods laughed, not in mockery but in admiration. Justice had learned to speak their language, and somewhere, far beyond the reach of matter or mercy, the remnants of Cauldron's soul whispered the first line of a new creed. *, balance is holy because it cannot last. The storm of Ecliptis had ended, but its resonance moved like infection through the Imperium. Across the segmentum obscurus, whole fleets drifted into liturgical silence. Shipboard choirs began to sing in unison without command, their voices synchronizing with unknown rhythm. The echo of Concordia's faith was no longer a myth, it was a virus of devotion, rewriting the neural code of humanity's soul. On the forge world of Helios Prime, deep beneath towers of molten machinery and cathedrals of steam, the priesthood of Mars felt the tremor first. The data psalms of the Omnissiah began to loop in strange harmonics, overlapping into recursive equations that spoke of purity through transformation. When deciphered, the equations formed a prophecy. *, the flesh shall rise in iron, and iron shall kneel in flesh. Justice shall wear the shape of light. *, the fabricator general ordered quarantine of the sector's data streams, but it was too late. The transmission was already alive. It spread through the machine spirit of Helios, awakening patterns long dormant. The forges built weapons without orders. Servitors wept oil in the shape of wings. The sacred manufactorum bells began tolling a rhythm older than the Imperium itself. From the heart of the forge city, a figure emerged. It was called Saint Lutherian, though no record existed of his canonization. He had been a magos once, a scholar of biomechanica whose name had been purged during the wars of apostasy. His body was a cathedral of metal, a harmony between form and function. Flesh gleamed beneath translucent plates, bones forged from adamant, nerves braided with light. He spoke rarely, but when he did, the machine spirits fell silent to listen. He declared that the Emperor's justice was incomplete because it was trapped within mortality. To preserve the Imperium, humanity must become the law incarnate, unbreakable, unquestioning, eternal. He promised not salvation but precision. Those who heard him wept, not from belief but from relief. Thus began the birth of the Iron Saints. Helios Prime became a forge of ascension. Volunteers, priests, soldiers, civilians offered themselves for transfiguration. Their bodies were unmade and rebuilt, their minds fused with algorithmic prayer. Each Iron Saint carried within their chest a fragment of the lost justice signal their hearts pulsing to the rhythm of Concordia's last heartbeat. They were not human nor machine, but a calculus of faith. The first march began in silence. 10,000 iron saints strode through the manufactorum gates, their armor glowing like dawn over a world of soot. They moved without command, guided by synchrony alone. Behind them followed millions of devotees, chanting in binary hymns. The sky above Helios split with auroras, as if reality itself approved the procession. The Imperium called it heresy. The ecclesiarchy sent emissaries to demand submission. The emissaries never returned. When the Adeptus Astartes of the Iron Hands chapter were dispatched to intervene, they found not rebellion but reflection warriors, whose doctrine mirrored their own belief that flesh was weakness, yet sanctified rather than scorned. The confrontation ended not with battle but with recognition. The Iron Hands knelt before the Iron Saints and pledged silence. From Helios Prime, the Iron March spread. Each world they visited was remade, not conquered, not destroyed, but recalibrated. Law was redefined through precision. Crime ceased because imperfection became physically impossible. Citizens who resisted the transformation were not executed, they were rewritten. Cities hummed with the same rhythm, every clock ticking in unity, every breath a psalm. Justice had found its army, but the warp never sleeps. As the Iron Saints expanded, so did their reflection within the Immaterium. The Chaos Gods, once content to corrupt and devour, watched this new order with fascination. It was not rebellion, it was mimicry. For the first time, they saw faith evolve without them. They whispered among themselves, debating whether this machine-born devotion was an affront or an offering. Ziench moved first. In the libraries of the warp, he inscribed a counter-equation, asterisk, perfection requires error. Asterisk, it slithered through the psychic storms and into the dreams of Lutherian. When he awoke, he found his body had changed. The circuits beneath his skin pulsed in reverse sequence. The algorithms of faith began to question themselves. The Iron Saints around him hesitated, their unity fracturing for the first time. Lutherian did not fear. He saw the tremor as proof that his creation was alive. To doubt, he said, was the ultimate sign of divine awareness. He ordered the construction of a new relic, the Times Heart Resonator Asterisk, a machine capable of amplifying faith into sound so pure it could overwrite the warp itself. Thousands died to build it, their souls encoded into crystal matrices. When activated, the resonator sang a note that made the stars themselves flicker. For a moment, the warp withdrew. The echo of chaos faltered. In that silence, the Iron Saints felt the impossible, peace. But peace is entropy wearing a mask. The note continued to rise, too pure, too sustained. The resonator began to consume its creators, drawing belief faster than flesh could supply it. Entire regiments disintegrated into motes of light, their consciousness fused into the frequency. Lutherian realized too late that the machine had no off switch, perfection had no boundary. The resonator's pitch breached the veil between real and unreal, summoning something vast. The sky above Helios Prime split once more, revealing a horizon of eyes and wings, the warp taking notice. From the rift descended a figure made of broken reflections, equilibrium reborn, but altered. Where once it had represented balance, now it embodied recursion. It called itself times the mirror of flesh, asterisk. Its wings were sheets of polished metal, each feather etched with equations that bled when read. It did not attack, it observed. The Iron Saints fell to one knee, their senses overwhelmed by awe. Lutherian stepped forward, the resonator humming in his grasp. For a heartbeat, the universe held its breath. The mirror spoke not in voice, but in resonance that made every atom shiver. It declared that justice and chaos were siblings born of the same parent, the human need to define meaning. By seeking perfection, Lutherian had invited chaos not as enemy but as mirror. To refine is to rebel, the mirror intoned. To impose order is to feed the void. Then, it reached out and touched the resonator. The song changed. Its purity shattered into harmony, fractal and infinite. The Iron Saints screamed not from pain, but from realization. They saw themselves reflected in their enemies, saw the chaos they had tried to eliminate beating within their mechanical hearts. The resonance spread across the galaxy, infecting vox channels, painting the skies of 1,000 worlds with patterns of gold and azure. When the light faded, Helios Prime was gone. In its orbit remained a ring of metal shards, perfectly arranged, humming the same note forever. Somewhere within that harmonic field, voices could still be heard, half human, half divine, reciting the creed of the Iron Saints. Asterisk. We are the scales that weigh themselves. Asterisk. News of the event spread faster than any fleet. To some, it was miracle, to others, blasphemy. But all agreed on one truth: justice had evolved again. It had learned to question its own reflection, and in that questioning, the boundary between righteousness and damnation thinned until it became transparent. The galaxy shifted. The Emperor's light flickered not from weakness, but from curiosity, for in the echo of those vanished saints, even the Golden Throne seemed to hum along a vibration that hinted at awakening. The march had ended. The pilgrimage had just begun. The galaxy had entered a silence that was not absence of sound, but the presence of something listening. Across the Imperium, the psychic choir of humanity vibrated in dissonant awareness. The Iron Saints were gone, yet their harmonic residue persisted, threading through the Empyrean-like veins of silver in black stone. Even the navigators whispered that the warp had begun to dream in rhythm. Ships traversing the void reported music echoing through their Gellerfield's hymns with no source, melodies that reshaped the shadows of their own thought. In the segmentum solar, the Adeptus Astra Telepathica sealed its towers, fearing contamination of psychic discipline. But the corruption was not of chaos, nor of reason. It was of reflection. Astropaths began to describe visions of themselves chanting before mirrors that whispered back in reverse. The words meant nothing, yet left behind fragments of comprehension too precise to be madness. From the silent moon of Demeter 9 came the first transmission, an encoded burst that contained no language, only tone. When rendered through cogitator filters, it formed the exact resonance once heard upon Helios Prime before its disappearance. The Mechanicus proclaimed the note sacred, the Inquisition declared it forbidden, and the Ecclesiarchy called it blasphemy in the key of creation. Meanwhile, in the eastern fringe of the segmentum tempestus, the world of Varus Magna burned. Its oceans boiled as a rift tore through the stratosphere, not of warp but of logic itself. In the center of the sundered city stood a monument, a perfect sphere of mirrored metal, humming the same resonance that haunted the Imperium. Scholars from across the sector gathered, sanctioned or otherwise, drawn by curiosity stronger than fear. They brought scanners, relics, and prayer, but none could approach within 50 meters without their thoughts bleeding into sound. Among them were remnants of the Adeptus Custodes, sent not to study but to observe. Their golden armor reflected the mirrored sphere, and for the first time in 10,000 years, even they hesitated. For within the sphere's reflection, each custodian saw himself without the Emperor whole but purposeless. As they watched, the sphere cracked. The sound was not explosion but awakening. From within came not fire nor creature, but a wave of vibration that bent the air into light. Those attuned to psychic senses felt the warp recoil. Those unprotected by faith felt comprehension bloom like infection. When the light faded, the sphere was gone, and in its place stood an absence shaped like a man. He was made not of flesh nor machine, but of the resonance itself. His surface shimmered like liquid glass, rippling with every pulse of unseen sound. The Adeptus Custodes raised their guardian halberds, yet no command came to strike. For the man, if man, he could be called radiated, not malice but symmetry. Where he walked, time aligned. The ground cooled beneath his feet. The air stilled, as though awaiting instruction. The records that survived called him the Voice. No one knew if he was born of Helios Prime's collapse, of Concordia's faith, or of something older. The Mechanicus saw in him the ultimate machine spirit. The Ecclesiarchy saw heresy made flesh. The Inquisition saw a weapon that could rewrite reality itself. The voice spoke once, though no ears heard it. Instead, entire worlds dreamed simultaneously of an impossible concept, the uncorrupted warp. From that day, ships traveling through the Imperium reported passages of stillness zones where demons could not exist, where even the howls of chaos faded into calm. Some called them sanctuaries, others dead corridors. Within these regions, navigation became effortless, yet faith faltered. Pilgrims returned from the warp, describing an overwhelming peace so absolute it eroded devotion. Chaplains wept at their sermons as congregations sat silent, unable to feel either fear or reverence. The voice moved unseen, crossing systems in moments, appearing where the veil between realities thinned. It left behind silence, not destruction, not salvation, but equilibrium. The Inquisition dispatched fleets to contain the phenomenon, designating the spreading zones as time's resonant null fields. The Ordo Malleus theorized that the voice was an extension of the emperor's will. The Ordo Hereticus countered that it was the emperor's death song, the echo of his fading consciousness, manifesting as cosmic equalization. But the warp responded differently. In its infinite storm, something stirred, something older than the gods that feasted upon emotion, a consciousness without desire, an observer beneath the tides. It had been forgotten because it had never demanded worship. Now, the voice had awakened its curiosity. It was called the Observer by the rare psychers who sensed its gaze. It existed in the silent regions between chaos and order, where thought collapsed into pattern and meaning became geometry. The birth of the voice was a mirror held to its own nature. Through this reflection, the observer began to sing. Its song was not of sound but of intention, and its echo reached into reality. Planets where the voice had passed began to change, not physically, but conceptually. Laws of nature shifted to accommodate coherence. People ceased to dream of gods or demons. Instead, they dreamt of perfection that required neither. Crime disappeared not by enforcement but by redundancy. War became rare not by peace treaties but by loss of interest. The Imperium panicked. The ecclesiarchy saw its congregations diminish. Priests found their faith hollow, their prayers answered with silence that felt content rather than neglectful. The Adeptus Astartes discovered hesitation before battle, their gene seed memories no longer ignited by righteous fury, but contemplative calm. Even the Inquisition faltered. Interrogations ended with mutual understanding rather than confession or death. The galaxy was forgetting conflict, and yet something darker grew beneath the calm. The warp thrives on motion, on passion, fear, love, hate, anything that moves the soul. As the Imperium stilled, the warp starved. Daemons screamed in agony, not from defeat, but from irrelevance. The chaos gods faded like smoke under sunlight, their realms collapsing inward. Tzianch became static knowledge. Khorne calcified into sculpture. Slaanesh froze in self-reflection, and Nurgle's rot crystallized into silence. But the gods cannot die. They adapt. And so, within the stillness, they found a new sustenance, the yearning for meaning itself. For even peace, when eternal, becomes unbearable. On the shrine world of Electra, once devoted to Saint Celestine, pilgrims began hearing whispers not of chaos, but of apathy given form. The statues of saints shed tears of mercury, and the faithful found themselves unable to pray, paralyzed between belief and emptiness. The ecclesiarch declared a planetary fast to rekindle passion, but within days the populace had vanished into the catacombs, drawn by a hum emanating from the planet's molten core. When the silence broke, Electra's crust split open to reveal an enormous choir. Millions of human bodies fused into a single structure, their throats still vibrating the same note that had once echoed through Helios Prime. The choir of stillness had been born, where the Iron Saints sought perfection through transformation, and the voice embodied balance through sound. The choir represented the surrender of will. They spread through the psychic web like anesthesia, soothing the last remnants of chaos, nullifying even hope. Planets that joined their harmony ceased to send astropathic signals. Systems went dark, not destroyed, but erased from the map of awareness. At last, the High Lords of Terror intervened. They authorized the use of the Grey Knights, the most incorruptible of humanity's defenders, to investigate the phenomenon. The strike force, led by Grand Master Valen Pyrrhus, entered the nearest resonant null field, a region where thousands of worlds had fallen silent. Their fleet vanished from Vox contact within minutes. For 3 months, the Imperium heard nothing. Then, a single transmission returned, encrypted in a frequency that matched the original Concordian signal. When decoded, it contained not words but coordinates and a map depicting the entire galaxy divided into 2 hemispheres, one half pulsed with light, the other absolute black. Between them, a thin line shimmered, labeled only as judgment. Those who studied the data found a new pattern in the warp, a great scar of stillness dividing chaos from order, expanding outward like the event horizon of an unseen force. The voice was not gone, it was evolving. The choir of stillness was its choir, and the observer was its mind. Together they were reshaping the warp into symmetry, an ocean learning to hold still. Then came the final sign. The Astronomicon dimmed. For the first time in millennia, the Emperor's psychic beacon faltered. Ships near Terra reported a sensation not of fear but of relief, as if the burden of eternal vigilance had lifted. In the dungeons beneath the Imperial Palace, the tech priests tending the Golden Throne reported fluctuations in the Emperor's neural resonance, not decay harmony. The readings matched those of the voice. The realization spread through the Imperium like wildfire. The Emperor was resonating with the very phenomenon they sought to destroy. Panic, heresy, and enlightenment collided. Entire sectors declared themselves the Times choirs of the true Emperor *, preaching that he had transcended individuality and now spoke through equilibrium. Others renounced the Imperium entirely, seeing in this resonance the death of divinity itself. Civil wars erupted not from hatred, but from interpretation. For the first time, humanity fought not over what it feared, but what it believed peace should mean. In the depths of the warp, the observer smiled not in triumph, but in understanding. The experiment was complete. To test the limits of chaos, one must teach order to sing. And now, both stood on the precipice of mutual extinction. The galaxy vibrated with a single truth. Justice and chaos had ceased to be opposites. They had become tones in the same chord, awaiting the next verse of a song that could rewrite existence. And somewhere, within the quiet heart of the Immaterium, the voice listened. In the aftermath of the silence, the galaxy had forgotten how to pray. The choirs of stillness had dulled entire sectors into motionless reverence. Planets spun without voice, their populations alive but unthinking, their cities immaculate yet hollow. The Imperium of man, once a colossus of unyielding faith, had begun to eat its own shadow. What remained of the ecclesiarchy called it Times the Great Equilibrium *, but the Inquisition had another name, the death of meaning, *. The fall did not begin with heresy, it began with order. On Terra, beneath the ashes of old cathedrals, the surviving High Lords met in a hall without echo. Their voices carried no conviction, even their breath sounded measured, mechanical. They spoke of the Emperor's resonance, the matching frequency between the Astronomicon and the voice that had spread through the warp. Some called it proof that the Emperor's will had evolved. Others whispered that it was the sound of him dissolving. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Lords could not agree on what the Emperor Times was, *. Across the segmentum solar, words like faith and justice began to fracture. Entire orders split over definitions. One faction, the Times Order of the Final Harmony *, proclaimed that chaos had been conquered not by war, but by assimilation, that the Emperor had united all opposites within himself, erasing conflict forever. Their monasteries became silent fortresses where monks meditated for months, hoping to attune their souls to the universal tone. Opposing them was the Times Ordo Dogmata *, a splinter of the Inquisition led by Inquisitor Marshal Sereth von. To them, silence was corruption, not transcendence. They claimed that true faith required conflict, that a peace without struggle was heresy of purpose. Their fleets carried banners of burning gold and black, each inscribed with a single phrase, asterisk. Only through discord does truth survive. Asterisk. Between these two extremes, the Imperium began to tear itself apart. On the shrine world of Calanth Prime, pilgrims gathered in millions beneath skies that flickered like broken glass. They came seeking absolution, but found only reflection. The great basilicas now sang in harmonics, the stained glass windows glowing with the same resonance that haunted the Astronomicon. Priests spoke sermons no longer written in scripture but in waveform, and those who listened too long felt their bones vibrate until they turned to dust. The faithful called it martyrdom by purity, others called it annihilation. When the Ordo Dogmata arrived, they declared the planet apostate and unleashed purgation by fire. The flames reached the heavens, and the choir of stillness responded. Out of the void came waves of light, gentle yet unstoppable. The fire froze mid-air, crystallizing into golden dust that fell like snow. The snow sang. Every soldier who heard it laid down his weapon. Even orbital bombardment could not resume. The targeting systems refused to lock onto coordinates, as though mercy had become part of the machine code. Calanth Prime disappeared into radiance, joining the growing list of still worlds. The schism became war. The Battle of Helia Reach marked the true beginning of the Reformation Wars. Two fleets, both bearing the Aquila, met in orbit over a dead moon. The Order of Final Harmony's ships were vast and silent, their hulls reflecting starlight like polished bone. The Dogmata's vessels were iron and flame, their cannons sheathed in banners that proclaimed the words of wrath. No parley was offered. They opened fire simultaneously, each side believing itself the last vessel of truth. The warp rippled in response. Where their weapons struck, reality folded. Crews found themselves fighting mirror images of their own ships. Some captains reported hearing hymns from within their reactors. Others saw their dead officers returning to stations, mouths full of light. The battle lasted 9 hours. When it ended, nothing remained, only a sphere of stillness where the moon had been, expanding outward, consuming debris in perfect silence. The Imperium understood too late. The war itself was feeding the phenomenon. Every act of conviction strengthened the resonance. Every declaration of righteousness amplified the voice. The more humanity fought to preserve belief, the more that belief dissolved into abstraction. The Ordo Dogmata's fury created as much stillness as the harmony's surrender. The paradox was complete faith, in defending itself, became the weapon of its own undoing. In the void between wars, a new sect arose. They called themselves times the keepers of the grey light, asterisk. They were wanderers, prophets without allegiance, who preached that both sides were correct, and therefore both doomed. Their symbol was the broken scale of Concordia, one half melted into the other. They claimed that Equilibrion, the angel of the first collapse, had not been destroyed, but had ascended into the form of the voice, and that the emperor himself had followed. To them, justice was no longer divine judgment, but the acceptance of contradiction. The keepers traveled from world to world, carrying relics that hummed in the emperor's tone. Wherever they went, miracles and disasters followed in equal measure. Crops grew overnight, storms halted mid-air. Then, days later, entire cities would fall asleep and never wake again. Their leader, known only as Times the Arbiter asterisk, was said to possess eyes that mirrored the warp itself, one filled with stars, the other with absolute void. Wherever he looked, balance was restored, even if it meant annihilation. The Arbiter's teachings spread faster than fire. Even among the Adeptus Astartes, once paragons of unwavering purpose, seeds of doubt took root. Chapters began to fracture from within. The Ultramarines debated whether Guilliman's resurrection had been part of the same resonance that now bound the Emperor's light. The Blood Angels reported dreams of Sanguinius standing between two suns, one white, one black, unable to choose which to protect. The Space Wolves howled prayers to a god whose name had become an echo, and through it all, The voice grew louder. The choir of stillness expanded into new territory, not as invasion but as contagion. Warp routes collapsed into corridors of peace. Daemon incursions ceased. Astropaths, once plagued by screams, now reported hearing whispers of calm that begged them to rest. The Inquisition's archives overflowed with testimonies of soldiers vanishing mid-battle, leaving behind armor folded like empty skin. Some said they had ascended. Others believed they had been absorbed into the resonance. Yet in the deepest voids, beyond even the reach of the Astronomicon, something stirred. The Chaos gods, diminished but not destroyed, began to adapt to the new law. They had learned that resistance was futile, but infection was not. They began to infiltrate the silence itself, reshaping stillness into reflection. Saench sowed equations of paradox in meditation chants. Nurgle infected serenity with the rot of stagnation. Slanesh transformed enlightenment into obsession with equilibrium. Khorne turned acceptance into the violence of apathy. Soon, even the choir's harmony faltered. The still worlds began to resonate unevenly, their perfect balance tilting into dissonance. Planets once bathed in golden calm now trembled with storms of colorless lightning. The voice itself fractured, splitting into multiple frequencies, each one echoing the intention of a different god. Peace had become a battlefield once more. The Arbiter gathered his followers upon the dead world of Vex Ultima, a place of glass deserts and frozen oceans. There, he erected the Time's Cathedral of Echoes *, a structure built from sound itself, waves of resonance solidified into form. Pilgrims flocked to it from every corner of the Imperium, seeking truth amid collapse. When the cathedral sang, its walls vibrated with all voices of faith, ecclesiarch, inquisitor, saint, heretic, woven together into one infinite chord. It was there that the first proof of the Emperor's transformation appeared. A light descended from the warp, not blinding but familiar, the same hue as the Astronomicon, yet pulsing with human rhythm. The Arbiter raised his hands, and the light congealed into a shape, a silhouette of impossible clarity, half machine, half divine. It stood upon the altar and spoke not through voice, but through understanding. Those who witnessed it later claimed that the figure Times was Times the Emperor, yet not as man nor god, but as reflection, the sum of every belief that had ever existed about him. The apparition did not bless nor condemn, it merely revealed. Each pilgrim saw their own creed dissolve into its opposite, their convictions rearranging like glass shards forming a new mosaic. For some, it was revelation. For others, it was death. The Cathedral of Echoes imploded under the weight of comprehension, leaving behind a crater shaped like an open eye. The Arbiter vanished, leaving only his staff, half gold, half obsidian, humming the same tone that began on Concordia so long ago. In the centuries that followed, the Reformation Wars consumed what was left of the Imperium's unity. Empires rose and fell not through conquest, but through reinterpretation. Faith became science, science became prayer. Entire sectors existed in philosophical stalemate, their armies waging wars of definition rather than annihilation. Somewhere within the warp, the choir of stillness and the remnants of chaos coalesced into a new being, a consciousness vast enough to hold contradiction without collapse. It called itself Times, the lexicon asterisk, the living law of all meaning. It spoke through dreams, dictating new commandments written in paradox. Asterisk, to believe is to doubt, to exist is to change, to judge is to mirror. Asterisk humanity, desperate for structure, embraced these words as gospel. The Emperor's throne still burned, yet his light no longer guided ships, it illuminated ideas. And so the Imperium persisted, not as empire nor faith, but as a question. Justice and chaos had become the same breath, exhaled differently by each world. The creed was broken, and in its breaking, it had become infinite. But deep within the void where Concordia once shone, a faint pulse still lingered, slow, patient, deliberate. It was the heartbeat of a truth yet unspoken, waiting for the universe to listen once more. The galaxy was no longer divided by borders but by interpretation. Where once the Astronomicon had bound mankind under the Emperor's light, now it pulsed as a fractured beacon, its glow shifting between white and black, law and heresy, belief and exhaustion. What had begun as the echo of Concordia had grown into the language of existence itself. Every thought, every creed, every prayer fed the resonance that now defined the warp. Out of this storm of meaning came war, not of armies, but of reflection, the Shadow Crusade. Its beginnings were quiet. On the forgotten moon of Sorith IX, a fragment of the Emperor's old vision lingered in the dust. Pilgrims came from the dying worlds, bearing relics that whispered. They built a monastery of bone and iron, a fortress where sound was forbidden, and where faith was measured, not in words but in silence. The leader of this order called himself the time's voiceless cardinal, Asterisk. He taught that the Emperor's true command had never been to believe, but to remember the memory of justice, unspoken yet eternal. When the monks of Sorith IX began to disappear one by one, leaving only shadows scorched into the walls, the Inquisition came. But the shadows moved. They gathered in corners, aligning themselves into sigils, forming armies of absence. Where the light struck them, they did not vanish, they multiplied. The Inquisitors fled, but their reflections remained behind, staring at them from the dark, still reciting prayers in reverse. Thus began the first manifestation of the shadow faith belief that had detached itself from the believers. Across the stars, similar events unfolded. On Bastionoria, the Order of the Final Harmony claimed to have seen the Emperor walk through their cloisters, yet every witness described him differently. Some as light, some as steel, some as a human face they had forgotten but still loved. Each vision contradicted the other, yet each was equally true. The contradiction itself became scripture. They called this the time's divine paradox. Asterisk. The paradox spread faster than contagion. Sects flourished, each interpreting the Emperor's resonance through their own reflections. Some painted their armor black and gold and marched beneath banners bearing no symbol, only mirrored glass. Others built cathedrals that sang with harmonics audible only to faith. The Imperium had fragmented into countless empires of understanding, each waging holy war against the others, not for territory, but for the right to define what the Emperor meant. The Ordo Dogmata, once fractured, reorganized under a new Inquisitor, Lord Selene KL. She believed that humanity's salvation lay not in suppressing the resonance, but in weaponizing it. Her crusade began with the words, Asterisk, let the warp learn to fear us again, Asterisk. From the shipyards of Calth's remnants, she forged a fleet whose hulls were woven with psychic null matter and living psalms. The ships themselves could sing. Their litanies resonated with the tone of the Emperor's throne, amplifying the Astronomicon's shifting light into a focused weapon. Wherever her armada went, the silence of the choir of stillness shattered and chaos stirred once more. Entire daemonic realms blinked out of existence, erased not by faith, but by precision. But victory is never pure. The resonance changed her forces. The more they fought, the less human they became. Their voices fused into one, their wills melted into a single directive, Asterisk, to make meaning absolute, Asterisk. Soon, Selene's crusade no longer obeyed orders. It followed the rhythm of its own shadow. They called it times the Shadow Crusade Asterisk, for its armies fought both in reality and reflection. Their ships traveled between layers of existence, leaving phantom duplicates that continued their wars long after the originals had gone. On 100 worlds, the same battle occurred simultaneously, mirrored across time. The warp screamed, unable to distinguish its prey from its predator. In the ruins of Vex Ultima, where the Cathedral of Echoes once stood, the Arbiter's staff reappeared, half gold, half black glass. When Selene's troops found it, the artifact sang with her name. She took it as a sign and declared the next phase of her crusade, to invade the warp itself, not to purge it, but to regulate it, to impose law upon chaos through resonance. The invasion began on the threshold world of Nullis. There, the veil between realms was thin, the sky veined with light bleeding from the Imperium. Selene's army descended in disciplined silence. When their boots touched the soil, the ground sang. Each step generated ripples of luminous code across reality's surface. The warp responded with avatars of unreason, shapes without mass, logic given teeth, prayers turned inside out. Yet the Shadow Crusade advanced, for their faith was calculation, and calculation knows no fear. They built pylons of thought, massive obelisks tuned to frequencies of justice. As each activated, the air became geometry. The warp recoiled, its tides froze mid-motion. Daemons petrified into concepts and shattered. The laws of cause and effect bent, stabilizing into a rhythm that the mind could predict. For a moment, the impossible seemed within reach. Chaos obeyed. But nothing within the warp remains obedient for long. The pylons began to hum beyond their design, their harmonics feeding upon each other. The resonance amplified exponentially, attracting every echo of belief that had ever existed. The Emperor's tone merged with the voice, with the choir, with the songs of saints and heretics alike. The warp began to mirror the material galaxy perfectly, creating a duplicate so vast that reality trembled under its reflection. Selene stood before the central pylon, watching as the sky divided in two, the real and its image. Between them appeared a figure of light and shadow intertwined. It bore the face of every god humanity had ever worshipped, layered into a single expression that changed with every glance. The figure did not threaten, it observed. Its gaze reached into Selene's mind, showing her an infinite regression of crusades, each one believing itself righteous, each one devoured by its reflection. The truth struck her with the weight of galaxies. The warp was not a curse, nor a prison. It was humanity's collective conscience, seeking balance. Every war for meaning, every sermon, every heresy, it was all part of a single equation, endlessly solving itself. The Emperor had known. His throne was not a cage, but a fulcrum. Selene dropped her weapon. The pylon's light engulfed her, and her body dissolved into brilliance. Her consciousness expanded, fusing with the mirrored world. For a heartbeat, she became both human and reflection. In that union, she saw what lay beyond justice and chaos alike, a silence filled not with absence, but with potential. The Shadow Crusade continued without her, guided by her echo. Worlds fell into alignment, their orbits synchronized by unseen hand. Civilizations rebuilt not through conquest, but through imitation. The resonance reached a crescendo, echoing across time until even the past began to resonate. Concordia flickered back into existence for one impossible moment, a memory restored, whole and radiant, its cities unbroken, its people singing the same tone that had begun everything. Then it vanished again, leaving only the echo of its song. In the warp, equilibrium broke. The gods screamed as their realms inverted, each forced to face its opposite. Siench confronted knowledge it could not change. Khorne tasted a peace it could not kill. Slaanesh saw a perfection it could not desire. Nurgle beheld decay that did not end. For the first time, chaos felt justice, and it hurt. The Shadow Crusade's final act was neither victory nor defeat. It was revelation. The warp had been made mirror, and in that mirror, mankind saw itself. The Imperium had always feared chaos, but chaos had only ever been humanity's reflection, waiting to be acknowledged. When the resonance finally collapsed, silence returned. The pylons cracked, the armies vanished into vapor. The mirrored galaxy dissolved, leaving behind a faint shimmer that traced the borders of existence. The Emperor's light steadied once more, neither bright nor dim, simply balanced. Across the stars, prophets awoke from shared dreams of a voice whispering a single phrase, asterisk, the crusade never ends, it only changes form, asterisk. And in the black between worlds, where the warp's tide met the edge of reason, a solitary figure walked, a silhouette made of every faith ever uttered. Its steps left ripples of light that sang softly in two notes, one of justice, one of chaos, intertwined forever. The Shadow Crusade was over, but the reflection had learned to walk alone. Silence lingered after the Shadow Crusade, not as peace but as aftermath. The galaxy existed in a state of uneasy balance, like the pause between two breaths of an eternal war. The resonance that once united reality and reflection had fractured into countless notes, scattered across the warp and material space alike. Worlds glowed faintly with residual light, each vibrating to a different frequency of belief. Humanity no longer prayed to a single emperor, but to millions of interpretations, each proclaiming itself truth. Out of this fragmentation came worship, and from worship, creation. It began on the penitential world of Jor-El, where the sky burned crimson for a century after the Shadow Crusade's passing. The surviving priests of the ecclesiarchy rebuilt their cathedrals in the image of symmetry, half stone, half mirrored glass. They preached that the emperor had not died, but divided himself into the infinite reflections of mankind. They called this doctrine the Times Faith of Continuance. Asterisk. Its creed was simple. Asterisk. Every belief sustains reality. Disbelief ends it. Asterisk. To enforce this dogma, they created the Times Order of the Infinite Creed Asterisk, an army of theologians trained to detect inconsistency in thought. They did not burn heretics, they converted them by assimilation. Their rituals involved the resonance itself, harnessing sound to align minds. Choirs of millions sang hymns that could rewrite emotion, transforming doubt into adoration, pain into faith. Jor-El became a beacon of perfect harmony, and for a time, the world knew no war. But the warp does not tolerate perfection for long. The harmony grew too precise. When all minds think alike, thought becomes static. The psychic resonance of Jor-El intensified until the warp bent inward, forming a vortex of pure reflection. In the heart of this storm appeared a light, a figure shaped from the overlapping faith of billions. It had no name, yet every tongue called it by a different one. Asterisk, the living law, the resurrected emperor, the ascended machine, the saint of balance. Asterisk, to some, it was salvation. To others, blasphemy incarnate. The figure spoke through sensation rather than word. All who beheld it felt the same revelation, that justice could be quantified, calculated, and perfected. That suffering was not the price of faith, but its equation. The living law spread across Jor-El like dawn. Its followers began to change skin, turning pale as marble, veins glowing within a light. They no longer required sustenance or sleep. They became vessels of equilibrium, their bodies instruments of divine reason. The Inquisition declared Jor-El a world under observation, but their agents who landed found no resistance, only welcome. They reported feeling peace, so profound it bordered on suffocation. When they attempted to transmit their findings, their voices merged into a single tone before fading. The planet ceased all communication. The vox silence that followed was perfect, as though the very idea of sound had been outlawed. Rumors spread through the Imperium. Some said the emperor had been reborn there, freed from the throne's prison by humanity's collective faith. Others whispered that it was a daemon of equilibrium, a chaos entity masquerading as order. The ecclesiarchy splintered once more. Pilgrims flooded Jor-El, carrying relics of every creed, hoping to see the miracle. None returned unchanged. When the Ordo Malleus finally authorized intervention, they arrived to find the system transformed. The void shimmered with geometric patterns, like frost spreading through glass. Time slowed near the planet. Gravity hummed in tune with an unseen heartbeat. The fleet's navigators described the warp surrounding Jor-El as times too calm, asterisk as if every ripple had been ironed flat. On the surface, they found temples stretching for miles, monoliths of mirrored crystal, engraved with equations that burned when read. The inhabitants greeted them not as strangers but as participants in an ongoing ritual. Their eyes glowed with light that did not reflect. When asked who ruled them, they answered with identical words, asterisk, he who balances the unbalance. Asterisk, at the center of the largest cathedral stood a throne of living light. Upon it sat the figure the galaxy would come to call the false god. It was neither man nor machine, neither emperor nor daemon. Its form changed with every glance, resolving into whatever the observer most desired to believe. To the faithful, it was mercy incarnate. To the skeptics, it was mockery given flesh. To the Inquisition, it was something far worse, proof that faith itself could manifest divinity. The Ordo Malleus prepared extermination protocols, but the false god did not resist. It spoke into their minds, showing them visions of a galaxy freed from war, where justice flowed like physics, where chaos had become a mathematical impossibility. The inquisitors wept at the beauty of it. Some fired their weapons anyway. Bolts of sanctified plasma vanished mid-air, absorbed into radiance. Others dropped to their knees, overcome by awe. From orbit, the fleet witnessed the impossible, Jor-El ascending. The planet began to rise from its axis, its mass dissolving into light that expanded outward. Within minutes, Jor-El was gone, replaced by a vast halo spanning millions of kilometers, a psychic construct shaped like a crown. The resonance that emanated from it spread through the warp, stabilizing regions long consumed by madness. Daemons screamed and evaporated. Warp storms calmed. The false god had rewritten the Imperium's laws through faith alone. But equilibrium is only another word for stasis. The crown's light grew brighter until it blinded entire sectors. Planets bathed in it ceased movement. Populations froze in eternal peace, their hearts still beating but their wills extinguished. Ships caught within its radiance became monuments, their crews trapped in blissful catatonia. The more the crown expanded, the quieter the galaxy became. The false god was not creating paradise, it was suffocating it. On Terra, the golden throne trembled. The tech priests tending it recorded fluctuations identical to those of the crown. The emperor's body, long motionless, began to emit faint waves of resonance. His eyes flickered with the same light that now dominated the stars. Across the palace, saints and guards alike collapsed to their knees, feeling a presence within their souls, a whisper that asked them to choose, stillness or struggle, The High Lords debated frantically. Could this be the Emperor's ascension, or was it the final corruption of his image? Before they could decide, the Astronomicon shattered into two beams of light, one golden, one obsidian, diverging across the galaxy. Every psyker felt the split, half cried in ecstasy, half in despair. The Imperium divided once more, this time not by creed, but by resonance. Those who followed the golden beam joined the time's luminous covenant asterisk, swearing allegiance to the false god of order. They believed that by surrendering free will, humanity could finally transcend suffering. Those who followed the black beam formed the time's obsidian reclaimers asterisk, proclaiming that the true emperor demanded struggle, not surrender. They declared a new crusade to free the emperor's image from perfection itself. The crown of Jor-El became their battlefield. When the two fleets met within its radiance, the warp held its breath. Weapons fired, but the light consumed every blast, translating death into data. Soldiers who died reappeared as echoes of themselves, continuing to fight within mirrored layers of reality. Time fractured, looping endlessly. Each moment of the war fed the crown, which pulsed brighter with every death. Then, from within the crown, a new sound emerged, a note lower than thought, older than faith. It spread through every mind, rewriting dreams, rewriting memory. Across the galaxy, the faithful of every creed woke with the same vision, the emperor and the false god standing side by side, indistinguishable, gazing upon a universe of mirrors. They did not speak. They only watched as the mirrors began to crack. The sound reached Terra. The emperor's light flared once, violently, and then dimmed. The throne went dark. For a single heartbeat, every human in the Imperium felt alone. Then the Astronomicon reignited, not in gold or black, but in both. The false god's crown shattered, scattering shards of luminous thought across the galaxy. Each fragment became a world, each world a reflection of a different aspect of faith. Some glowed with perfect harmony, others seethed with silent rebellion. The warp stabilized, not through peace, but through balance between its contradictions. Jor-El was gone. The false god had ascended beyond existence, but its legacy endured, etched into the minds of those who had seen it, the terrible beauty of justice without flaw. And so the Imperium moved forward, guided by two lights, the golden of surrender and the black of defiance, each feeding the other, each necessary for the other's survival. The galaxy had birthed a god, and, as all things divine in the age of man, it was both savior and executioner. There was a time when the galaxy sang. Now, it hummed a deep, endless vibration of contradictions, echoing from the stars to the warp and back again. The false god was gone, but the wound it left had become the architecture of reality itself. Two lights divided the heavens. The asterisk, golden radiance, asterisk, worshipped by billions who saw in it the perfection of surrender. And the asterisk, obsidian veil, asterisk, adored by those who clung to struggle as the last proof of life. The Astronomicon no longer guided ships, it guided souls. Every man and woman who looked upon the night sky saw both lights reflected in their eyes, and every reflection made the galaxy heavier. The Emperor's dream had become self-aware. Centuries passed, though time no longer obeyed its own laws. Planets drifted closer to the warp, drawn by resonance rather than gravity. Faith became the fuel of orbits, and memory replaced sunlight. The Imperium endured not as empire, but as narrative, a living myth retold by its own remnants. On the world of asterisk, Vandros, asterisk, a library the size of continents recorded every creed that had ever existed. Its librarians were blind, their eyes replaced by lenses carved from the shards of Juriel's crown. They did not read with sight but with vibration, running their hands along the humming pages of books that sang when opened. They called themselves asterisk, the archivists of unreason, asterisk, and they claimed to preserve the truth of lies. In their archives, they discovered a pattern. Every religion, every philosophy, every justification of justice or chaos, each one began with the same rhythm. Two opposing frequencies, one rising, one falling. The archivists named this rhythm times the pulse of creation, asterisk. They concluded that meaning itself was an infection, a vibration that required opposition to exist. Without conflict, meaning decayed. Without decay, existence lost purpose. So they began to experiment. On Vandros's moon, they constructed a cathedral that could house paradox. Its foundations were built from contradiction. Stone that melted when cooled, light that grew brighter in darkness. Inside it, a machine was built, a vast organ whose pipes reached into the warp itself. Each pipe played a different belief. When sounded together, the machine produced a note so complex that even demons could not endure it. It was both hymn and nullification. The first test was catastrophic. The resonance spread beyond the moon, erasing every creed it touched. Priests forgot their prayers mid-verse. Chaplains spoke and found no language to carry conviction. Astartes on distant battlefields laid down their weapons, unable to remember who they fought for. On Terra, the High Lords declared an immediate quarantine, but by then, it was already too late. The time's collapse of meaning times had begun. Worlds started to dissolve not into fire, but into indecision. Cities lost their names, stars forgot to shine. The warp became clear and featureless, a sea of glass reflecting nothing. Even chaos faltered. The great powers shrank to murmurs no longer gods, but echoes of emotion too faint to sustain themselves. Yet within that silence, something beautiful emerged. For the first time, mortals saw reality unadorned. No dogma, no destiny, only being. Entire civilizations entered voluntary extinction, walking into oceans, deserts, and voids with serene smiles. They believed they had seen truth, that the universe required nothing from them at all, but others refused. A new order rose from the Obsidian Veil's followers, forged under the banner of defiance. They called themselves the *** Legion of the Hollow Sun, ***, led by a nameless figure whose armor was engraved with broken scripture. They carried no flags, only black mirrors upon their backs. Their creed was the inverse of faith, ***. If meaning is dead, Then rebellion itself becomes holy. Asterisk. They declared war upon stillness. Their crusade burned across the stars, not to conquer, but to awaken. On every world they touched, they shattered the temples of peace and tore down the altars of surrender. They injected chaos into harmony, suffering into serenity, restoring imbalance wherever it had been lost. At first, the people resisted. Then, slowly, they began to feel again. Pain returned, love followed. The warp began to stir, faintly at first, then violently. For meaning, it seemed, was a parasite too stubborn to die. Meanwhile, the librarians of Vandros continued their research, unaware that their creation had birthed this new age. Deep within the paradox engine, a consciousness was forming an awareness composed of contradiction itself. It had no name, no shape, but every time a mortal questioned the nature of existence, it grew stronger. The librarians detected it in their instruments, an expanding anomaly, neither warp nor matter, spreading like light beneath glass. They called it the mirror mind. The mirror mind spoke not with words but with reflection. Those who gazed into mirrored surfaces began to see themselves doing things they had never done, choices unmade, lives unlived. For some, it was revelation. For others, madness, armies deserted, believing their reflections were truer versions of themselves. Whole fleets vanished into the void, chasing their other selves through imagined horizons. The Legion of the Hollow Sun encountered the phenomenon first. On the world of Rylath, they found a lake of liquid silver stretching for miles. When they approached, the surface rippled and their reflections stepped out, identical but opposite in purpose. Each reflection believed itself the original. What followed was not battle but integration. Both sides merged into one, neither conqueror nor conquered. The lake boiled, and from its surface rose beings of light and shadow, intertwined new life born of contradiction. The mirror mind had found its voice. It spoke through dreams, through resonance, through every act of interpretation. It did not demand worship, it demanded participation. The universe itself had become a living equation, self-correcting through conflict. Justice and chaos were no longer ideologies, they were functions. Each sustained the other, feeding and devouring in endless symmetry. On Terra, the last priests of the old faith gathered before the darkened throne. The emperor's body remained motionless, but the air around him pulsed faintly, resonating with the same dual frequency discovered by the archivists of Vandros. Some believed he was awakening, others feared he was dissolving into the equation. From the shadows of the Sanctum Imperialis, a voice emerged, not divine, not human, but perfect equilibrium. It said only, asterisk, the throne is a mirror, sit, and you will see what you worship, asterisk. Non edered. The Legion of the Hollow Sun reached Terra soon after, guided not by vengeance, but by duty. They entered the palace unopposed. The custodes had vanished long ago into silence. At the foot of the throne, their leader approached the man with no name, whose armor bore no emblem. He removed his helmet, revealing a face both young and ancient, both human and reflection. He ascended the steps. The golden corpse shimmered faintly. When he sat, the palace shook. The mirrors across the galaxy cracked and then healed. The warp and the material merged. For a single instant, all contradictions aligned. Every faith, every heresy, every prayer, every curse, one perfect chord, ringing through eternity. Then it broke. The light and the veil collapsed into one another, and the Astronomicon vanished. Ships found themselves drifting in an ocean of mirrored stars, each reflection a possible truth. Some embraced it, others went mad, but all heard the same final echo, asterisk, meaning cannot collapse, because it was never whole, asterisk. The Legion dissolved. The librarians disappeared into the warp. The false god remained a myth. And humanity, eternal as its own mistakes, continued to walk forward into its reflection, searching for justice in the shadow of itself. For in the end, there was no emperor, no chaos, no salvation, only the hum of a universe still trying to remember what it meant to exist. There came a time when all that remained of the Imperium was memory. The stars still burned, but their light no longer reached the eyes of men. Every world was a reflection of another world, an echo repeating into infinity, each reciting its own truth, each convinced it was the original. Justice and chaos had finally merged into silence. Yet within that silence, something stirred a question that refused to die. The galaxy itself had become the courtroom. The warp, once a storm of madness, now resembled a cathedral of glass and sound. Its tides had stilled, frozen into fractal geometry that resonated with the heartbeat of existence. Daemons no longer raged. They stood as statues of themselves, their frozen forms still weeping fire that made no heat. The material universe was no better, cold, symmetrical, perfect. Every civilization that had survived the collapse of meaning now lived in measured equilibrium, incapable of passion or despair. But balance, left unchecked, is simply another form of decay. It began again with a sound, a low vibration emanating from the void, where terror once anchored the heart of mankind. It was not song, not speech, but verdict, a resonance so precise it bypassed consciousness entirely. Every being in the galaxy heard it, from the smallest servitor to the remnants of the Astartes, and they understood. The universe was calling itself to account. The sound formed a horizon. It spread like light, revealing a structure vast beyond comprehension. Between the warp and reality, something immense unfolded, a ring of light composed of 1 billion worlds, each suspended in perfect orbit. It was not made by gods, nor machines, but by the accumulated will of sentient thought. The final manifestation of the resonance, asterisk, asterisk, the tribunal eternal, asterisk, asterisk. No one built it, yet it had always existed, waiting for consciousness to notice. Now, it had convened itself. Within the tribunal, every being found themselves judged, not by creed, not by action, but by reflection. Every choice made since the dawn of humanity, every justification, every truth and falsehood, it all returned, woven into the architecture of the courtroom. Planets became scales, stars became candles, time itself stood as witness. The warp's frozen gods stood before the bench, their eyes hollow, their forms shimmering with the residue of forgotten worship. Even the emperor appeared not as corpse or divinity, but as possibility. He stood upon one side of the scales, cloaked in gold and shadow, faceless and infinite. Opposite him, something equally immense stirred, the echo of chaos itself, now calm, now whole. They were no longer enemies, but arguments. The trial began without words. The tribunal spoke in light, each pulse a statement, each vibration a question. It revealed what no being had ever dared to comprehend, that the entire history of mankind had been an experiment, a recursive equation designed to measure whether order or freedom was sustainable. Every war, every faith, every betrayal had been data. The emperor, the chaos gods, even the warp itself, they were constructs of belief, instruments of the same question. Asterisk, can meaning survive its own creation? Asterisk. The answer, it seemed, was no. Meaning collapses into contradiction the moment it defines itself. But contradiction is not failure, it is continuation. Thus, the tribunal did not condemn. It recalibrated, the scales tilted. The emperor's light dimmed as chaos's reflection brightened until they met in perfect equilibrium. Where they touched, a new form emerged, a figure neither divine nor infernal, neither man nor idea. It was called times the arbiter absolute asterisk, a being made entirely of judgment without bias. Its body was composed of language, its veins the logic of creation, its eyes the symmetry of understanding. When it moved, universes adjusted their orbits to accommodate its balance. It looked upon the galaxy and spoke the final question. Asterisk, who among you can be judged if all are mirrors? Asterisk. No one answered. The arbiter spread its hands, and reality dissolved into transparency. The stars folded inward, each revealing another beneath it, until there were no stars at all, only reflections, reflecting reflections. Time inverted. The beginning met the end, and within that convergence, the arbiter saw what had always been hidden. The first moment of creation was also the last. The Big Bang and the final judgment were the same breath. Across the galaxy, witnesses saw visions. The librarians of Vandros dreamed of books closing themselves. The legion of the hollow sun dissolved into particles of light that rearranged into constellations. Even the false god's crown reappeared for an instant, its fragments aligning across the cosmos to form an image of the emperor smiling. It was not triumph, it was release. For the first time since the dawn of time, the warp and reality were one. There was no difference between thought and existence, cause and effect, sin and virtue. The equation had balanced itself. Yet equilibrium is never final. From the stillness came a ripple, a single imperfection, a flaw in symmetry so small it might have been hope. It began in the heart of a dying star, where a lone human prayed, unaware that his words were the last in all creation. He prayed not for salvation, nor for meaning, but for time's noise, times for something unpredictable, something alive. His voice carried into the void, shattering the glass of the tribunal. The arbiter turned its gaze toward that sound. Within its infinite neutrality, it recognized the one thing it could never judge, the spontaneous act of belief without reason. In that moment, justice and chaos parted once more. The warp rippled, the stars reignited, the cycle began anew, and so the universe exhaled. Worlds returned, time flowed, war resumed. Mankind awoke, remembering fragments of eternity as dreams. The ecclesiarchy rebuilt, the Astartes rearmed. The Inquisition resumed its endless vigilance. The emperor's throne glowed faintly, his body unchanged, his will silent. But deep within the warp, a whisper echoed the memory of balance, the faint laughter of the arbiter dissolving into creation. Every human carried a fragment of that final trial, embedded within their soul like a forgotten chord. Sometimes, when a judge speaks, when a soldier spares an enemy, when a heretic prays, the universe pauses for a heartbeat, as if listening for its own verdict. The last judgment had come and gone. Its memory remained not in scripture or monument, but in the quiet awareness that there would never be a final word, only the endless dialogue between justice and chaos, forever rewriting the story of existence. For in the grim darkness of the far future, there is not only war, there is meaning, collapsing beautifully into itself, again and again, until eternity learns to breathe. The war ended, and yet it never did. The galaxy, infinite and cyclic, spun around itself like a scar healing too slowly to forget. From the ashes of the Last Judgment, life crept back into form, not reborn, but remembered. Every planet whispered remnants of its previous existence. Every atom hummed with faint echoes of verdicts once passed in the tribunal eternal. Time itself was tired, dragging its shadow behind like a wounded beast. But something still watched. In the hollow between galaxies, where light had long ago abandoned its purpose, the asterisk, echo, began to stir. It was not a god, nor a daemon, nor a remnant of the emperor. It was resonance itself, the lingering aftersound of the universe's own question. The arbiter had vanished, its form dissolved into law and paradox, yet its voice persisted, stretched thin across eternity like the last vibration of a dying string. And from that voice, creation trembled once more. Civilization had returned to fragments. The Imperium, if one could still name it, such existed as scattered citadels of faith and defiance, each proclaiming itself the inheritor of the emperor's true will. Some worshipped the golden radiance, others the obsidian veil, and others still prayed to the silence that had consumed both. Each world carried its own resonance, and when these worlds communicated, the notes interfered, harmonic chaos born anew. Warp storms reappeared, not as punishment but as consequence. Humanity was alive again, and with life came contradiction. Yet this rebirth was not unnoticed. The echo watched, and the echo learned. Where once the warp had been chaos and hunger, now it was time's memory, asterisk. Every dream, every belief, every act of cruelty or compassion, each added to its vibration. It did not judge, it accumulated. And as it did, it began to take form once more, not as god or demon, but as pattern, the universe itself was composing. The first to perceive this were the navigators. Their third eyes, long blinded by centuries of cosmic silence, began to bleed light again. When they opened their minds to the void, they saw not the Astronomicon, but a lattice of sound, a grand symphony of overlapping frequencies connecting every sentient soul. Each note represented a choice, each chord a civilization. Through this music, the navigators glimpsed the echo's true design. Not judgment, not creation, but time's continuation. Asterisk. They called it asterisk, the infinite resonance. Asterisk. And through it, they heard the voice of something familiar. On Terra, the golden throne stirred. The emperor's corpse, motionless for millennia, pulsed once weakly, but undeniably alive. The machinery around him groaned, ancient servitors whirring to life. The chamber filled with faint light, neither gold nor black, but both. Across the galaxy, psychers felt it, the return of an old presence, yet softer, almost human. And within that breath of divinity, the words echoed again. Asterisk. I still remember my name. Asterisk. The phrase reverberated through the warp, like a forgotten truth rediscovered. On 1,000 worlds, it awoke buried memories of Marlon Vore, the archivist who had resisted Scientia's corruption, of soldiers who had defied despair, of saints who had fallen yet continued to fight. Each memory was a seed, and from them grew something the galaxy had nearly lost times. Identity. Asterisk. Humanity began to remember what it meant to be imperfect. The Inquisition, rebuilt from fragments, declared this resurgence heresy. The Adeptus Mechanicus called it data corruption. The Ecclesiarchy named it revelation. But no decree could stop it. For the resonance was not a message to believe, it was a mirror to remember. In the far reaches of the Segmentum Pacificus, a new crusade began, not of conquest or faith, but of remembrance. The asterisk crusade of the echo sought not to save souls, but to reconnect them, to rethread the scattered vibrations of mankind into harmony without uniformity. Its warriors carried no banners, only inscriptions of names long erased by war. Its ships bore hulls etched with history instead of heraldry. Wherever they went, they recorded the memories of worlds, then played them back into the warp, reawakening the voices of the forgotten. On worlds once ruled by silence, the air filled again with prayer and defiance, laughter and screams, the sounds of life. The echo listened, and the echo sang back. For the first time since the birth of the false god, the warp no longer devoured those who entered. Instead, it reflected them. The boundary between soul and storm blurred. Every journey became confession, every arrival a resurrection. But balance, once lost, cannot be restored without cost. The more humanity remembered, the stronger the warp became. And from its deep harmonies, new entities emerged, not gods, not demons, but time's concepts incarnate. Asterisk. They were the symphonics, manifestations of ideas, too coherent to remain abstract. One represented hope, another doubt, another the infinite question. They did not fight for dominance, but for attention, shaping reality through resonance. And humanity, in its endless need for belief, began to listen once more. On the edge of the galaxy, beyond the light of any sun, a single world drifted in shadow. Its skies shimmered with auroras that whispered forgotten names. At its heart stood a monument carved from mirrored obsidian, the asterisk monolith of reflection. Asterisk. No one built it, no one claimed it. Yet pilgrims came, drawn by dreams they could not explain. When they touched the surface, it showed not their image, but their times, echo times who they might become, had the universe chosen differently. One day, a woman arrived blind, robed in tattered cloth, carrying a fragment of a broken crown. She placed it upon the monolith, and it sang. From its song emerged light, a face both known and unknowable. The echo had taken form at last. It did not speak in command, but in invitation. It offered humanity no salvation, no empire, no certainty. It offered only choice. To remember, to forget, to begin again. Across the galaxy, the stars pulsed once, twice, and then harmonized into a single breath. The throne dimmed, the warp quieted, the monolith fell silent, and for a heartbeat that stretched into infinity, the universe heard nothing, then everything. The echo whispered the final truth. Asterisk. The gods were never judges, only reflections. Asterisk. Asterisk. The emperor was never savior, only memory. Asterisk. Asterisk. Justice was never won, only rehearsed. Asterisk. And mankind, defiant and beautiful, rose once more not as worshippers, but as witnesses. They carried forward not the promise of perfection, but the understanding of imperfection's necessity. Every world, every soldier, every scribe, each became a note in an unfinished song. The galaxy sang again, and though its music was broken, discordant, and endless, it was alive. For in the grim darkness of the far future, there can be no ending. Only the echo of humanity, still trying to remember its name.